I think that humanity could do a lot of good for themselves and each other, just to pause, take a deep breath, live in the moments when you can. We're all so hectically busy and consumed with technology that we hesitate to pause and sort of take in our surroundings for what they are.
Here's the key to my front door. You got a pillow if you lost yours. You got a seat at my table. You got a home. Here's somebody who believes you. Let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a home.
Welcome to The Creator's Journey. I'm your host, Charles Gupton. Fears and obstacles on the journey of creation are things we all face. Every creator who works from the heart faces the same challenges. You are not alone. In each episode, I talk with creative leaders about the mindsets and processes they use to push through their struggles to create and put their work out into the world in order to make a difference. If creating an impact is something you're struggling to achieve at this point in your life, and you believe the encouragement and feedback of a trusted group of creative leaders could make a difference in your growth, I have a solution. I'm leading 2 Impact Accelerator mastermind groups to help a select number of creative leaders achieve objectives that are simply not possible working alone. If you're interested in building a new body of work based on renewed creative energy and deep encouragement to grow, please let me help you do that. Contact me at charlesgupton.com. And thanks for joining me on this journey.
Here's the key to my front door. You got a pillow if you lost yours. You got a seat at my table. You got a home. Here's somebody who believes you. Let truth remind you. You've always got a place to go to. You got a home.
My guest, Molly Scannell, is a creative director who's worked with a number of ad agencies, including SapientNitro and Mullen. She has nearly 20 years' experience working in visual and user experience design with a long and diverse list of clients, including John Hancock Investments, Chrysler Group, Bryant, Liberty Mutual, Smithsonian, Yale School of Management, and CBS. In addition to being a competitive rower for the last 20 years, her abundant energy also flows into her role of mothering 3 amazing daughters. As a result of pursuing her own personal art projects and then posting the results on Instagram, she has developed a personal following that has not only encouraged more artwork, but also given her career a bump. So Molly, let's talk about living a big life and the lessons that have come out of it for you.
Let's do it.
You grew up spending a lot of time outside in the woods with friends and on your dad's boats, exploring, playing, getting to know the natural world.
I did.
As I've been following your post on Facebook for a short while, I've been delighted to see that not only are your photos just beautifully composed and rich with texture, they seem to me to be informed by a really rich love, if not a reverence for the natural world. You want to talk a little bit about your early formative years and how you see its impact on the way that you currently view the world?
It's kind of interesting to talk about this right now. I feel like I've been talking about it quite a bit, raising 3 girls in an urban community with technology sort of obviously on the rise, which is totally the opposite of what I got to experience when I was a child, which it seems to be some of the similar experiences to people my age. You know, we'd leave our house at 8 o'clock in the morning, and my mom actually had a big bell that she would ring at dinner time, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it was the Tibbetts household dinner. So everyone would yell, "Molly, Jason, it's time for you to go home for dinner." And we'd just drop whatever we were doing and go home. And that was like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And everyone knew you were okay. You were in the middle of the woods. You were swimming in quarries. You were down at the beach. Whatever you were doing was totally acceptable and totally fine, which is just not sort of the society that we live in today. And I find that I really crave it, even as an adult when I go home. And I've been spending a lot of time at home recently and just sort of being close to nature and touching nature and the textures that are involved and the colors. And I always find it to be incredibly calming to especially be near the ocean, because I spent so much time on it as a child, a lot of sort of single alone time, if you will. I didn't, it was rare that parents would let their friends come spend all day or a couple of days out on the boat with us. So I had to learn how to make fast friends with the marine life and whatever my dad would bring up from scuba diving for dinner that night. So yeah, it's an incredibly different experience watching my kids grow up and not have the freedoms that I had. I don't have the ability to have zero inhibitions like children did when I grew up. I think as small infants, kids have no inhibitions and they're very creative and they're not sort of blocked with what's the right way to do things. But now we have to educate our children so early on, like, don't talk to this person. And if you're on this device, make sure this, and make sure you're constantly on top of your kids so they're, not getting in trouble or whatnot. And it's hard. It's hard because all the people around you are judging you and the way that you are raising your kids and how you treat them. And I like to encourage my children to be independent and gain responsibility. And that sometimes encapsulates big things like crossing really busy streets and, walking to school by themselves and walking home. I often crave my childhood every once in a while, which is just sort of a magical, mystical place.
Well, I have similar memories as well, just jumping over the fence. I grew up in an urban environment in Charleston, South Carolina, but at the time we backed on to just huge woods, which later on became a huge subdivision in itself. But the paths that my friends and I would walk through and play the various characters of Daniel Boone and whoever in the woods became residential streets later. But a lot of time through the years, building forts and campsites and pretending and telling stories. And it seems like that creativity of telling stories and imagining things plays into, it seems to me, bigger creativity later. And it seems like a lot of that is missing from my perspective.
It's a whole different level of creative expression in some ways.
Yeah, it seems that way to me. I guess it's a different kind of creativity, and a lot of it's technology-driven as opposed to natural world-driven.
Yeah.
How do you see that impact in the way that your children or your daughters are engaging in art, either with you or separately from your interaction? Because that seems to be a huge part of what you're involved with, is art with your girls as well.
Yep, absolutely. I grew up in a sort of bohemian artist community in Lanesville, which is sort of this small, I guess, township of Gloucester, Massachusetts. And I just grew up being creative. There was a community full of artists and writers, people that wanted to get away. And all of my friends and I were hyper creative. My grandmother was creative, and my mom was an artist, and my aunt was an artist. And we lived near all these other semi-famous artists, the Manships, Walker Hancock, Ruth Hagstrom, and we all sat for them. So art was very much a part of our daily lives. We just sat for them from portraits, clothed, obviously, but they would pay us. So it was just part of our life. So I can't imagine not growing up with it. So instinctively, I just do it with my children so that we do it together, and it's fun, and it's something that we can do together. And I think just because it's been ingrained in me since I was a child, it's relatively easy for me to work with my children in that manner. And I find they actually have really interesting ideas for me when I'm working, and I'm like, gosh, I don't know what to do with this. What would you guys do? And I let them do it. Even if I don't like it, I like the ability to collaborate with my girls and let them feel like they're actually contributing to the process and making together. And a lot of my friends around here, they don't come from the same sort of communal art background and are constantly like, can my kids come to your house and do art? Like, can they all do art together? And I'm like, sure, whatever. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And it's interesting to see all of my girls sort of develop their own artistic tastes. My eldest daughter is a really good draftsman, like my mother. My mother is photorealistic dynamo. She just has this really impeccable drawing ability that I have never seen anyone in real life do before. And my older daughter's like that, and she gets really discouraged very quickly about not being a perfectionist, and this isn't coming out the way she wants it to. And my middle daughter is more of a sort of abstract pop art kind of kid, and she works very three-dimensional, and she makes paper sculptures out of things she looks at all on her own. And my littlest daughter she's still pretty little. She's only 4, but she does everything. She's in that zone where she's like, everything's cool. I can do anything with everything, which is the best kind of kid to be around, because you learn so much about how to process materials and color and markers and pencils very differently, because there's no rules.
How amazing.
There have been no rules established for these people. So it's really cool. It's super cool. I love it. Like, the whole reason that I started to become creative again was not that I wasn't creative in the ad agencies that I was working at, but I just felt very sort of disengaged from my hands. Just working in digital for so long that you kind of forget what it feels like to create with your hands, and what paper feels like, and what glue feels like. And when I had my third daughter, I was home a lot with the girls, and I was like, gosh, when was she born? November, so it was cold, and we were inside a lot. So we'd start doing art projects, and I was like, I'm gonna do one too. If they can do it, I'm not just gonna sit here and observe. I'm gonna start making too, while the baby is, still for a moment. And I started giving myself 5 minutes to just make anything, but make it with my daughters. And this is how the whole thing started, was that I wanted to have this tactile experience that they were having, and work with them, but give them time while I brought this new being into their lives that was kind of taking away from their time. So it gave us all the opportunity to be together. But I had no idea of how important the switch in this moment was going to be for me as an artist, to start actually creating for myself and nobody else, which was a really powerful realization when I started to notice this was happening, that I was the one going like, hey guys, let's make stuff. I'm going to try and make something every week, just one thing every week. And that was my goal. And I just carried sketchbooks around with me everywhere. Yeah, it's really great. And I'm glad that, I still make constantly, but I'm really happy that we still actually make together. When the girls see me making stuff, they're like, oh, Mom, you did that on a box, like on a balsa wood box. Like, can I have one? I want to do art too. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's turn the TV off. Let's put the music on.
That's wonderful.
Let's get all the paints and stuff out. And it's just, it's awesome. I couldn't be happier in those moments with those guys.
Wow. I can only imagine. I want to come to your house too, because I want to do more art play.
Anytime. It's the best.
Yeah.
I have wine.
It's got to be. It's got to be. So talk a little bit more about how that started working into your Instagram feed, and how that's impacted your professional work and engagement.
I didn't realize I was becoming sort of this analog artist. As I started to make more art, I started contributing with friends at work. And one friend in particular, we started doing assignments with each other where I saw them more or less as competitions. I'm not really sure he did, but I was like, I'm going to win this competition. And we'd make up rules for these assignments. For example, the assignment had to be a size that was under 11 by 17. It had to have the number 40 in it, and it had to have an animal in it and part of a person. And it had to use the color yellow and blue. And then you could do whatever you wanted. We would go to lunch and reveal the pieces that we each made over the course of 2 weeks. We would critique each other, and then we would establish that there was a winner. And the first criteria we would go through was who hit on all the things on the list that you were supposed to hit on. Did anyone cheat? Did someone miss something? And then we would actually talk about who applied the idea much better. And it was not only interesting to make the work and have an assignment, but it was also interesting to work with a friend, especially a creative friend, and be really honest about your own work and their work. and have those dialogues and critiques. It was really interesting that we could be hyper honest with each other, because a lot of people were like, how do you guys do that? You need a third party judging. And we're like, no, we're grown-ups. We can do this. We're big kids.
It's like art school again.
Yeah, totally. But we were more mature, and
hopefully.
But it was the foundation of sort of like loving the idea of having these assignments to make art to, and have the time so I didn't feel so crunched over the course of 2 weeks to sort of test and fail over and over again till I found something that I actually felt comfortable with, and present it. And it gave me time to experiment and figure out what I liked working in, and how I liked working, and how I liked actually presenting my work, and sort of understanding the different ways to do that. And as I did that, I was documenting it on I was documenting it on Instagram. And what I realized was my friend had more followers than I did. And I was like, how come no one likes my stuff? And I was like, oh, I know, because I had this epiphany of nobody cares about my kids. I post something art related and people are like, oh, she just makes art, and then there's all her kids. So I decided to split my art and keep my personal family life separate. And as I started to do that, it became this kind of special place for me that I could be sort of hidden, and nobody needed to know who I was, and I could just have my art be my art. And I wasn't doing it for anything but myself, and I liked looking at this gallery of things I made, but I especially liked watching the progress and evolution of my skill grow, and see how it would shift back and forth through analog. And then I slowly moved into digital, and it slowly just started taking off. And that's sort of understanding also the game of Instagram and hashtags and how that all works. And then a woman from London reached out to me from Instagram and said, I really love your feed. I'd like to feature you. And I thought she was joking with me. And I was like, sure, yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay. And she sent me back this huge thing, and I was like, oh my gosh, is this real? This is real.
That's funny.
Holy shit. So I sent it to her, and and what's kind of interesting about all of this, since that happened like 2 years and change ago, I still am sort of stunned when stuff like that happens to me. Like, that's probably the biggest thing that's happened to me out of all of this. But she told me she was going to tell me when she featured me, and I was in a meeting and she featured me, and I was at SapientNitro, and my phone just started going crazy. It was going so crazy I couldn't use it because the notifications were coming in so fast. It was like just circulating so fast, and people were coming over and videotaping my phone. It was the most insane thing I've ever seen, like for a sort of social encapsulation of this is what happens on the interwebs when people push something about somebody and at such a magnitude force with such a magnitude audience.
Wow.
That it actually affected my ability to like make a phone call or to check my email or to text anybody. Like, my phone was incapacitated. And I think that day I went from it was insane. I think I got like 3,000 followers that day. And over the course of the next 4 days, I think I ended up with over 6,000 followers.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really intense and wild. And then slowly but surely, I kind of just kept making stuff, and people started reaching out to me and wanting to do features and wanting to do projects. And it's been so wonderful and such a place of positive energy for me and positive creativity. And I've met so many artists through Instagram and just really cool people, and gotten a lot of amazing opportunities, like doing editorial pieces for Jungle Magazine. And starting May 11th, I'm doing a social campaign for Cartier jewelry through an agency in Paris, which is super exciting, just to be engaged with a brand at that level, as a quote unquote social influencer, which I think is really funny because I don't see myself like that. But it's just interesting how art is helping define the meaning of brands and audience influence, which I know has been around forever. I obviously know that because I've worked at agencies forever. It's just different when I'm the person that's helping affect that. So it'll be interesting to see when Cartier posts my work and then I post Cartier's work, what happens after that. I'm really interested to see sort of if anything happens at all or what. It's all just a big experiment at the end of the day, but it's pretty exciting.
Well, isn't it all?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a really interesting quote that I was thinking about you actually in this conversation that we were going to be having, and I was home, and I don't know why this struck me as so funny, but the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I was with my family, and we had an artist friend over who we've known forever, and he's an amazing painter and also just an intellect and really into sort of theory behind the world and life and art and physics and science and whatever. And for some reason I wrote this down, but he talked about how consciousness gives birth to the universe. And I was like, what is he even talking about? And then I went home and I was like, well, I guess it could be really about anything. And I guess it could be about sort of like this idea of brand ambassadors and social influencers actually being these people that are now sort of being used to awaken the consciousness of all these people that are so hyper-focused on their digital devices. They don't know how to put them down. They don't know how to cross the street without them anymore. You know, I can't tell you, including myself, how many times I've seen someone or myself bump into a tree branch because I was looking at my phone while walking on a sidewalk. But I just find it really interesting that people are not taking in information the way that, you know, we have been for years and years. And now there's people like me out there that are going like, I'm going to make some art that's going to help tell a story around this brand and this idea of being edgy and trendy and whatever, what have you, you know, and that I can make some art to help tell that story to elevate a brand. I still don't actually believe that, but I can't wait to see if it really works.
What I continue to be joyfully excited and amazed at are the stories that I hear of artists who are doing that, but they started out because they were doing it for themselves, making art, not trying to contrive a being around that, if you will, that they, as you did, you were doing it for yourself, and because it was kind of a soulful internal process that came out in a form of art for the world, it started resonating with people.
Yes.
As opposed to people who try to copy others or to contrive, in a sense, what is it that the world wants? I'm going to go make what it wants.
Yeah.
And that will help me be successful, and are frustrated that they can't seem to find what buttons to push or how to make it happen. Whereas it seems to me, the greatest influence is coming out of those who are doing it out of their own love of creation and seeing where it goes. And with you, with your daughters, it was coming out of that relationship and the excitement of a 4-year-old and mom and, you know, all of you pitching in and doing this stuff. And you have new creations that have come out of it that are now having a broader influence. I mean, that's exciting to me.
Oh, so exciting. It's not only exciting, it's like my happy place. It's my place that I get to go away and just sort of shut off all the noise and chaos of the world and be like, this is so nice and relaxing and I like looking at this, and I like knowing that I just made this, and it's fun. It's like it's a break, like that I feel sort of fulfilled. Like in advertising, it's one of those things where I'd say the majority of the time people are working on selling something that's not true and being sneaky on how do we make something look better than it really is to get the end consumer to purchase this product. Whereas everything that I'm doing in my own mind is just honest. I'm not trying to sell something. I'm not trying to make something for anybody else. I'm just making something for myself to relax and sort of feel creative, and that feels really good. It makes me happy.
Yeah, as it should.
Yeah.
In preparation for our conversation, one of the first things that I read on your site was your manifesto. Out of your manifesto, you talk about a number of near-death experiences. One of the things that I've discovered through the last several years is that when we're dealing with the death of loved ones around us, it has a way of narrowing our focus onto really important matters in our lives. And you talk in your manifesto about having gut-wrenching experiences both in your life with your health as well as those around you. Can you talk about some of the events around death and around some of the loved ones around you and how it changed and turned you into what you produce and how you think and see the world each day?
I live a very big life. This is a fact. Anyone that knows me knows that. When I look at my experiences as a being and as a person, from even being a small child into the adult that I am today, or the adult child that I like to think I am.
I like that.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time alone, and I think it was okay. I don't think I ever worried about being alone, and I think that's sort of part of the magic of my childhood when talking about the ability to run in the woods and play with your two best friends that were your neighbors and really your only friends your whole childhood, and be in the middle of the woods and pretend you're fairies and, be lifting up rocks looking for fairies and picking wild blueberries and looking for salamanders when it was raining and looking in ponds for frog eggs. And I just happened to grow up in a very beautiful place. And we even captured fireflies from daylilies in the spring evenings or summer evenings and put them in mason jars. Like, that was a real thing. I grew up in that place that I see in children's books today, and I'm like, that really existed when I talk to my kids about it, and they're like, it did? But over the course of that time, I think it taught me sort of the importance of being alone. I think it also gave me the hindrance of being guarded constantly and having sort of the inability to totally understand how to trust somebody else, especially with myself. And as I grew older, I think I sort of hung on to this sort of loner mentality. I'm sure anybody that I know that you might talk to would say, Molly has a bajillion friends in the world. She has so many friends. And I do really hang on to this idea of, I talk about this a lot, this idea of familiar strangers. And I think familiar strangers actually goes much deeper for me than it does sort of on the surface level when I talk about it in general, is that I have a lot of acquaintances. And I would say lots of those acquaintances probably think they're my friend. And I would probably say that I don't have a lot of really close friends. And I think I've sort of struggled with that through my not early adolescence, but sort of early adulthood, and trying to find out who I was and the balance. And I think some of that balance for me came from being an athlete, being a rower, and switching over to sort of running when I lived in New York City, because there's nowhere easy to row. Meeting lots of people and always having a touch point on these people, but never getting too close. And when I came to Boston, my brother was here, and my brother had struggled with sort of addiction his whole life. He was in and out of foster homes as a child, so we didn't totally grow up together, but he has by far always been the closest person to me with regards to experiencing sort of the tip to tail of family life and what that was like, and the only person that would ever be able to comprehend that. He ended up passing away 9 years ago this August from what we think is a heroin overdose. It's incredibly sad, and it's awful when you see that people sort of struggle with these addictions their whole life, especially when it's someone that you love and someone that's part of your family. And I think it took me a while to mourn him and mourn his loss and not be totally angry with him. But I had this moment, I don't even know why I thought about this, but when I was living in Boston, working in Boston, and I was rowing, and I had to leave work, and I had to get to practice, and I was driving down Sturo Drive in my fancy little Jetta along the Charles River, and I was like, God, I am so important. I have very important things to do. I have this important job, and I have this important practice to go to, and I am busy. I have things to do. And up ahead of me, I saw on the bike path along the river, I saw this gentleman rollerblading. He didn't have a shirt on, and he had these like little cutoff jeans on, and he was going crazy doing all these jumps and stuff. And he had longer hair and this deep sun-kissed skin. And I was like, that guy's having the time of his life. And as I drove by, I looked and I was like, oh, Jesus, that's my brother. And I was like, of course it's my brother. And for some reason, I really hung on to that memory. And when I think about it now, I'm like, what he was doing is something that I could never do. And I'm going to promise myself that I'm going to try harder and do this as often as I can. And what he did, and he did so well, was he lived in the moment. And he didn't take certain things for granted. Like what was happening in that moment for him is sometimes the moments that I remember with him is when we were children on the boats and we were jumping into the ocean when you could see no land anywhere and you're just making the best of it. And he was enjoying the sun sort of getting lower. It was a warm day and he had nothing in the world to do but rollerblade around and enjoy himself and exercise. He was just living in that moment. And that is something that I hang onto daily. And I talk to my children about being able to live in these moments and not grow up too fast, and that you're only a child for such a small portion of time, that it's really important to be a child, not in a, child kind of way, like when you're being a child, but just sort of being able to do cartwheels on the playground and, not worrying about, my older daughter is constantly talking to me about growing up and can't wait to go to high school. And I know I used to be like that too, but it's so hard to get them to slow down and go like, you're going to be an adult most of your life. Like, just enjoy this moment of playing soccer and having no real responsibility. And so that was one of my first sort of real deep, intense sort of realizations through sort of traumatic experiences. 4 years prior to that, I was training really hard for a local team to make, the top boat. And I was being very serious about, my sport and rowing and very, very important job and very important rowing and trying to balance all this stuff. And I just wasn't feeling well. And then finally, after weeks and weeks of not feeling well, I started to just feel pressure on my chest. And my mother told me to call the doctor, and they told me they were going to send an ambulance if I didn't get my friend to take me to the emergency room. And I was like, okay, I'll call my friend. And we had this really hysterical drive over to the hospital. We got lost. I eventually, at that point, could barely walk because my leg was in so much pain. Got into the room. It's the first and only time I've ever walked into the emergency room, and 4 people walked out, and they were like, "Are you Molly?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And they were like, "Come with us." And I was like, "Whoa."
Right.
So this is service. And I was trying to make a joke about the whole thing. And I ended up finding out that night, the doctor came in. It must have been 2:00 in the morning at this point. And he was like, "Molly, it looks like you had a heart attack, and at some point and you have a blood clot in your leg and you have many, 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 many blood clots in your lungs. And I looked at him and I was like, oh, when can I go home? And he was like, you can't, you got to stay here for a while. And I think I was just in so much shock that I didn't even know how to take in that information. And the next day I was having a really hard time, and the nurses just gave me a bunch of morphine to calm me down and finally brought me to an appropriate room because I was in the cardiac ICU, and I swear to God the person next to me was dying while I was there, which was horrifying. But I was in the hospital for a week, and everyone kept coming in to me, and Brigham and Women's is a teaching hospital, so I had tons of people coming in all the time, and I had no idea I could say I don't want to be a teaching patient. And I was just so out of it. I couldn't walk for 2 or 3 days. So my leg hurt so bad from the clot in my leg, and every doctor that came into my room was like, "You're the rower." And I was like, "Yeah, I guess I'm the only rower here, huh? Yeah, I'm the rower." And they're like, "You should be dead." And I was like, "Yeah, that's what they say." And I kind of just got old. It got old to me. I didn't want to talk about it anymore. And about 6 weeks after I left the hospital, I started to have a breakdown, and I called my cardiologist and I just said, "Well, I'm scared. What if this happens again?" And he was like, "Geez, Molly, it took you so long to get to this point.
Wow.
This is totally normal." And he talked to me for quite a while. I think he stayed on the phone with me for an hour, and he might have even been on vacation. And we just talked. As we talked, I felt so much better. But what I realized was that, I'm so busy trying to do all this big stuff all the time. And I think it actually took my brother's death for me to really take a hard look at what had happened to me.
Right.
That I started to really be able to embrace this idea of owning the moments that we have when we can, because you don't know if you're going to be able to enjoy a moment tomorrow. And I know that sounds very sort of somber and terrible, but I like to look at it as, hopelessly optimistic with regards to I can sit here for 5 minutes and enjoy the sun setting, or, whatever. It doesn't have to be the sun setting. It can be something totally mundane, somebody walking their dog, or, an exchange of two people I don't know on the street saying hello to each other, and just sort of this idea of life is happening and it's in constant motion, but no one's really ever paying attention to the details. And I just love sort of looking at life through a different lens and being able to appreciate all these things that I wouldn't have appreciated in the past, because I would have been too busy with this idea of I have a big job, I have very important things to do, I'm a very important rower, and I also think becoming a mom has helped me with that as well. My grandmother is in the process of passing right now, and just being with her this past weekend. And I'm her only surviving grandchild, and she did a huge portion of raising me as a small girl, which was an amazing feeling, to be in her house and just sort of with her for long extended periods of time, holding her hand and talking to her and just remembering all the things that we did together. But at the same time, watching the rest of the family sort of do their busy thing around the house. And I realized wow, it's really hard to be present in this moment of this person's life. Granted, she's not, my parent, she's my grandparent, but it felt so amazing to have the ability to be very present with her. And it's a gift. It's a huge gift. And I don't know if I would be able to see the importance of that if I hadn't gone through all of that and some other very, very close personal friends passing that this, helped me see like that. And I think it's so important. It's so important for my children, who I also brought to see my grandmother, because I think they're also close to her, but just the idea of understanding sort of that our life is, it's not permanent here on earth, and that there is a timeline to it, but it's having them have the ability to be present with her, not only in her life, but in her passing, and sort of seeing that cycle close is important. And they were so wonderful with it. I was really shocked, super shocked, and how gracious they were. And they each took their moments with her, and holding her hand and talking to her and drawing her pictures. And it was really wonderful.
Frequently, people are so transient that they're not near the people who've had such an influence in their lives, or they've moved away. So to have that opportunity and to learn presence and the importance of that is probably lost a lot on children. But I think as we get on in life and look back and remember those moments and how critically important they have been in forming, in a sense, who we are.
Yep.
That's a real privilege to have that.
It's very much an amazing privilege. I feel very, very lucky.
I want to jump back a little to the physical processes in your life. You've talked a bit about rowing and running in the past, but you continue to be pretty active in those areas. How do they play into your creative work and the problem solving that you do, whether at work or at home?
That's so interesting you bring that up. I was just talking to my aunt about this, actually, who is also an artist. I think that very early on, when I started doing sports, and I always knew that I wanted to go to art school from a very early age, that it allowed me to figure out how to balance my time a little more effectively. I think it actually has become a great tool in that balance of time and scheduling time, but also just not only being able to sort of flex my creative mind when I'm being creative, but it also gives me, when I'm working out, that physical exertion. I find that they're very similar places for me to play, but they're just doing different things with my body. So I find that they actually balance each other out as well, not only in my life, but just for each other as sort of yins and yangs. Part of the reason why I love being an athlete, and especially a rower, and having the ability to cross train and run, is just that I'm in nature, that I am, rowing, especially just because I obviously grew up on the ocean, but it's very similar with regards to, I think, the creative process for me and why I do it. It's very clearing and sort of meditative. Like when I row, I usually launch at 5:30 in the morning. So I get up at 10 to 5 and get down to the boathouse and get everything sorted and ready. And it's kind of magical because it's so quiet. The water's usually calm, and this time of year, like the flux of the weather, there's mist that comes off the water, and all you hear is just the sort of cadence of your blades entering the water and exiting the water. And it's just this sort of monotonous rhythm that goes back and forth, kind of like a long distance swimmer. If I don't even know the longest distance, but it's like you just hit a rhythm, and or a marathon runner for that matter. It's the same motion over and over and over and over and over again. And you just hit that sort of timing, and you can sort of shut your mind off a little bit from everything else, or you can sort of problem solve while you're doing it. I happen to just like melting everything away and sort of being at one with what I'm doing. And I love being outside and in nature and seeing all of that around me. And I do think that having that balance and seeing sort of the palettes that I'm surrounded by, I was talking to someone about this a couple months ago. I was like, gosh, man, the colors that I often use always have sort of a watery color to them with some sort of hint of a bright color. But it usually feels very water related to me. And a lot of times I use urban landscapes just because I find, especially brutalist structures, I just find them sort of to be really interesting to look at. And right. their edges are really interesting. And I feel like they're incredibly controversial just for people in general, because so many people think they're just so ugly and don't have a place on this earth at all. My grandfather actually worked on concrete architecture when he moved to Boston. He worked on the public transit as well as the Boston Public Library. So I feel like I was exposed to a little bit more of it as a child than probably your average kid. So I see that there's definitely an influence of, the sort of physical side of myself and the mental side of myself with regards to understanding this idea of structure and timing, but also sort of commingling the visuals and the cadence that I experience from rowing and running into my art, for sure.
Well, even though I'm not a rower, I do connect with you on the waterfront part of things. I'm a lap swimmer, even though that's inside, and possibly because I'm more underwater in that it allows me to shut the world out and have time to think and problem solve.
Yes.
And then in nature, we live on a moderately large piece of property, a farm, and I've carved a lot of walking trails through the woods all along creek stream lines, and we have a pond. So I've created loops that all side up against the streams and water because I always want to be as much as I can in nature near water. So when we camp or do any kind of hiking or anything, it's always connected, parallel, crossing in water. I'm very connected with that water element from that perspective, just not in a boat. The way you grow up. It's
really the same, like you swimming a lot as an analogy to rowing, because people are like, well, I don't quite get it. And I'm like, it's a cadence.
It is.
And you keep the cadence and you keep it moving. Whereas like for some reason running doesn't do it for me as much. But when I think about swimming, because it's a full body, it's like you have to control your breathing in a very precise way. And it's just different. It's more meditative to me for some reason, swimming versus like a running.
Right. It is. Yeah, I've been swimming for, 40 plus years. There are times I've missed it or fallen away a little bit, but I tried running and my knees just couldn't handle it and I didn't enjoy it. So I always find myself back to the pool again, and I feel like it's better for my mind than it even is for body. But as if the two were disconnected somehow.
Right.
I want to jump a little bit into your work and your work processes. And there are a lot of questions, a lot of things as I looked at your work on your website and just looked at the myriad projects that you've worked on. I'm visually oriented and work in the motion world. I was especially taken with the video series that you worked on for Chrysler commercial vehicles. They were just beautifully crafted. Talk a bit about your role in bringing these into fruition. If you have any stories about the process, especially of selling these stories to the client and then crafting. I mean, what I loved about them is how they featured people as heroes instead of the product or the trucks. Mm-hmm. I've already determined I'm going to go out and buy a Ram 2500 with a Cummins engine now. So yeah, see it work.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. That project, I have to say, was one of my favorite projects when I was at SapientNitro. We were very lucky where Chrysler's the house account still at SapientNitro. Gosh, I think it's been there for like 6 years now. But they had this special project come in where Ram Trucks had its commercial division underneath Ram Trucks. So as you know, Chrysler has all these different sort of sub-brands under them. They have Fiat, they have Ram, they have Chrysler, Dodge, probably something else I can't think of right now. It's been so long. But they wanted to experiment and see what would happen if they took sort of this idea of Chrysler commercial out of Ram Trucks and made it its own brand. Would it be able to survive? What would it look like? How would they sell it? Because there's small businesses that need multiple trucks to get specific things done, and they usually buy them one at a time, and then they'll additionally add them. And I think commercial is up to 7 vehicles, and after that it becomes a fleet, and that's a totally different purchasing process. My partner and I had this idea of, let's talk about American hard work. You know, that's what this should be about. What's amazing about working with Chrysler and this specific client was just amazing. I think it's the second time we worked with him. And he's just a wonderful client to chat with and ideate with and collaborate with. We sold him this idea. He was really into it. And then we send people out to get casting. And usually Chrysler helps sort of tell us where to go and what people are willing to talk. And once we narrowed it down, we did this really super fast. Being out in the field with all of these people telling their story was just one of the most heartwarming experiences I've ever been on at an ad agency. Being out in the field, coming up with an idea and helping sort of shape the script lines of questions and how we want these people to be perceived on camera, which is nothing more than authentic, but they do have to make sure that they're talking about their vehicles in a specific way so it's representing the brand appropriately. It was so amazing. We had an awesome crew working with us, DP and photographers, but the people were so incredible, the way they spoke about their business, and it kind of changed my perspective on sort of how these small businesses work.
Right.
This one guy owned a towing company, and towing companies in general have this negative connotation to them, but he's actually also saving people's lives when they break down in the middle of the night and you're a woman and you're pregnant and you're in the middle of Texas and you need to know that you have someone to rely on. And this gentleman, Jaime Rocha of Rocha Towing, is a family-owned business, and it was just really heartwarming, and they're just amazing people to talk to, and they were so gracious. They were so proud of the work that they do, and they were so proud of owning a Ram to get their work done. It was incredibly inspiring, and they were all mostly doing things for other people. There was Boggy Creek Farms, where they started off growing organic food for people, and now it's turned into a much bigger farm. It's not like they're millionaires or anything. They're very comfortable and they're happy growing healthy food for the local community. And they have a lot of volunteers that help them. I think it's Bear Dental. He takes his equipment and packs it up in his Jeep, and he goes and services troops' teeth before they get deployed. Volunteers to do that,
Wow.
And it gave you a whole new perspective of just kind of like people aren't necessarily what they seem, and there's a bigger picture usually to what's going on behind the scenes, and it's sort of, they're generally humble people. It's not things that they talk about generally, but there's just some really beautiful moments of just sort of humanity and kindness behind this particular project of American hard work. And they came out beautifully. They all came out beautifully. The client was so happy. We were so happy. I think that the talent was very happy, obviously, with how the videos came out.
I'm sure.
It was just a really fun project. And just to be places where I normally wouldn't be. And in Texas, meeting with people, talking about their businesses, and just a really humbling, amazing experience of humanity, mostly. It was great.
Well, they were filmed and produced and created with such dignity and beauty. I was just drawn to watch them several times each, to listen to the stories, especially the farm stories, since I'm live on a farm and so drawn to the rural lifestyle in so many ways in our neighbors and those around us. But again, such real, endearing stories.
Yes.
A lot of creatives will complain about the constraints that they have on them. You hear things like, "Oh, I could really do great work if the clients would just take our handcuffs off," without really acknowledging that great work is frequently done in spite of, if not because of, those constraints. Are there any constraints on that particular project that may not be obvious to viewers? Or if you want to take it in general, if there are constraints that you often find that you are, in a sense, boxed in. This came up in my mind earlier when we were talking about the project with your friends, where you've got about 6 or 8 specific things that you're listing there as must-haves, that you're willing to be you're willing to take on those constraints and just create in spite or because of them.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on constraints, either on this project or in general?
I think when you're working with a brand in general, especially like a Chrysler on that project in particular, there's always going to be a constraint around what you can do and what you can say about the brand, but always a financial constraint. And it's all about what can you get done within the budget that you have to still tell an amazing story. I generally like to look at constraints as opportunities to just see how good we can get things. I find that, and I'm not going to say that I've never complained about anything, but I found that sort of early on in my career and as I moved along, that the more I complained, the less creative I was and the less challenged I felt. So when I would look at, okay, these are the constraints, this is kind of the idea, how do we work as a team? Because I've always worked with a team. I always had a partner and I always had a team working with me. How do we make this great? What are all the things that we need to do without going crazy, without going above and beyond? Like there has to be a way to make this work. And sometimes that's actually presenting your idea to a client and saying, hey, we need $30,000 or more dollars. And if you can sell the reasons why, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. But I think that constraints are generally, in my own personal mind, really important because I think it helps steward an idea to some degree. And I just think that if I didn't have guardrails or constraints, like I sometimes don't know that I would entirely know that what I was doing. And I do find when I'm creating art on my own and I don't have, if I'm just sort of blank, I often find myself just going through things like I don't know what to do. And then if I just start making, sometimes that process, when I don't have anything to really think about, it's so vast that I just can't even focus and I give up because it's just not worth my time or energy in that moment to force something to come. But if I have constraints and guardrails, no matter where I am in the creative process, whether I'm at an agency, whether I'm at home making art for a project, having some constraints helps guide that process. The less I sort of complain about constraints in general, I find that I actually create more opportunity and that people have less feedback for me. It's kind of a really interesting thing when I look back at it, and I'm just like, wow, if I'm not so tied to this thing, but I'm staying within the guidelines and I throw in a few ideas here and there, it goes much smoother than fighting the process the entire way, which seems pretty intuitive and obvious. I just wish I knew that 20 years ago.
Well, we all do. We hope that wisdom comes with some age. But again, it would seem intuitive, but it doesn't seem to be that clear to a lot of folks. We seem to have a culture of complain first as if there is some kind of reward to be found in it.
Exactly.
Rather than the rewards to be found in the opportunity. Let's just get to it. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. And jumping back to 20 years ago, wishing, you knew what you now know. Can you think of any early projects in your career that taught you some valuable lessons about the need to either have processes in place or even, maybe more importantly, mindsets that you learned that have stayed with you through your career?
One of my favorite jobs in the entire world that I ever had the opportunity to join this particular company was working at a really small industrial design firm in Concord, Mass. And then they moved to Maynard. I had been laid off and was like, wow, this is so awesome. I am just going to work out all the time and go to the beach. And totally took advantage of that. And then I realized after...
the life.
Yeah. After like 8 months, and I was like, wow, I'm not going to be getting an unemployment check. What am I going to do with myself? So I got a job at Starbucks so I could get health insurance and slowly started to pull myself together. And I ended up getting a freelance job with this industrial design firm. And when I went in to interview, a woman was running the company, or that particular office. The mother company was in Chicago, I think. But she was like, oh, great, you have this experience and that experience. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, so this is what we're going to have you do. We're going to have you work on, pick up the design for the handheld interface for this artificial heart. And then you'll move on to the hospital screens. And I was like, wait, what? I don't know how to do that. That's the thing. That's something that keeps people alive. I don't do that kind of stuff. I just do websites, like when you click here, and I mean, if you miss a click, it's no big deal. But if someone kind of misses a click or a step on the screen, they're going to die. And she's like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. And I was like, okay. So I took the job. When I think back on this particular place and my boss, Elizabeth, she's the first woman that I ever had as a boss. And what she did that no other boss has done for me before, and I don't know if I can attribute this to her being a woman, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say it is, was she believed in me. And she was patient, and she answered my questions. And because of that, I was really open, and I wasn't pretending to be something that I wasn't.
Go with it.
And everybody at the company was like that. I was working on one particular project that was a cough assist machine, so the machine that Christopher Reeve used after his horse accident. The mechanical engineer, the head of mechanical engineering, came up to me and he was like, hey, did you pick a button? And I was like, what are you talking about, a button? I do screens. And he's like, no, you have to pick the button out. That's part of your job as an interface designer. And I was like, I don't know anything about buttons.
Yeah.
What kind of buttons are there? And he just listed this whole litany of buttons. And I looked at him and I was like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, hold on. And he came over with a box of buttons. And he's like, play with these. Do this today. Just play with these buttons and pick the one that feels right to you. And I was like, this is so cool. People trust me, and people think I'm going to do a good job. But even the idea of sort of exploring that idea, that tactile sense of touch and what it means for a human to engage with a product and have a payback of how they're engaging with it was so important. And the idea of everything that I did at that company with that type of mentality, I just feel like does not exist in the digital agency world. It is so fast. No one ever pauses to think much about anything, not because they don't want to. There's just no time. And, you only have X amount of hours, and we only have this amount of budget, and make it all work. And again, those are those constraints, and those can be good. But when I have to compare and contrast about my experience at this one company, was that I loved being green. I loved that it was small and I was exposed to learning so much information. I went with my research strategy people on field disagree with you to physicists. I learned about energy and how energy actually works when people are using light on skin. And I had to design segment design for water pH testing for Thermo Orion, and got to work in a lab and mess around with beakers. And, there's something really beautiful about being able to test and learn that I just feel like is getting lost within the agency world. Although there's still companies like IDEO and Design Continuum that a lot of people moved to from the company that I was at that probably still work in that same manner. I chose to go the agency world after I left the industrial design world. But that was by far one of the most important learning experiences for me professionally. It was just, I guess, mirroring behaviors that people are going to put faith and trust in you, and you're going to have to follow through and make sure you're being honest to not only them, but to who you are, and follow through. And it was easy and it was fun. And I learned a lot.
And how has that impacted the way that you lead teams and, I guess, mentor the younger people coming into this business?
I think that I'm real. I think being real is hard. I remember actually talking to somebody, I don't know, they're HR, people success, I don't remember what they're called at Sapient, but we were just like catching up one day for nothing in particular except for we're having coffee. I don't know how this came up, and I was like, I believe that everybody should fail. I was like, I don't believe they should fail to the point that I'm not there to catch them, but I think it's really important for people to feel that, to know what success feels like. And she was shocked. She was in shock and awe and totally disagreed with me and thought that approach was totally wrong. And I was like, look, I'm not here to coddle people. I'm here to make great work. And part of making great work is working together and finding ways to work together, but also making sure that these people are learning in the process. That means having lots of difficult conversations, but it also means praise. And I feel like the cultures that I have been in professionally, that praise is very hard for people to give. I think that people are always looking to pass the buck and point fingers. And maybe it's this notion or idea of moments that I talked about earlier, that it's really important to recognize people, especially when they're showing moments of extraordinary effort. And that extraordinary effort could be a small change in behavior that they took some feedback and applied it. I just think as humans in general that when we're trying hard and we're doing things right, to get acknowledgement and sort of recognition for that goes a long way for character building, not only for that person's individual self, but for the product that they're working on, for the team they're working with, and for the client that they're making something for. So it's really twofold. It's positive in every which way versus this sort of, you messed up, now I got to fix it, thanks a lot. Like, that does nothing for anybody. And it's silly because when again, here's where this rowing analogy comes in. Rowing in a boat, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you've got to come together as a team, and you all move that boat together. So if someone's falling down, you go help that person. It seems like a really obvious, easy thing to me.
Another water analogy, I think of ripples in a pond. You throw a rock or a pebble in a pond, and the ripple impact, whether it is positive or negative, goes a long way.
Yes.
We often don't see the impact when someone is criticized. There's kind of an old joke or story about, the guy that gets kicked, gets fussed at work or belittled at work, and the process of going out and cutting people off in traffic and coming home and yelling at the kid, and the kid kicks the cat, and on down the line, there's a ripple effect of negativity.
Yes. But
there's also the ripple effect of positive, of kindness and affirmation way down the line. And I think about, jump back to your story earlier in your career, because people believed in you and gave you opportunity. That not only helped you in your confidence, but your ability to produce better work on down the line, even to the point of leading and managing teams and people years and years later. So there is a huge impact.
Yeah, and I actually think it goes even beyond just teams, but into your relationships with clients,
of
because
course.
It builds trust. I still talk to so many of my clients that I've worked with at agencies, just because there's the idea of that you're working from their perspective. You're working with someone that's authentic, and they're not trying to sell you a river or pull wool over your eyes, but they're actually trying to do something good for you, and they're listening to you, but they're also telling you as a client, like, I have no problem talking to a client and saying, like, I like that you're thinking about this, but that application is not going to work out because of X, Y, and Z, and we should really pursue ABC. And I find that those conversations are such trust builders.
Right.
In the relationship with your clients, that you maintain a really healthy, strong relationship with them beyond the agency, beyond the project. And that's so important.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time. I think I'd love to go deep into that one area. Is there someone that who is outside the spotlight but doing important work that's having an impact that the world should know about?
One of my best childhood friends, Julia, is a scenic painter. So she makes a living painting sets for movies. Like she can turn, oh my God, she showed me something she made. It was just a piece of styrofoam and she made it look like this crazy, really old metal crank. And I was like, that's styrofoam? She was like, yeah. Or she can change plywood into looking like a brick row house. It's incredible what she can do. It's amazing. But that's not her passion. That's what she does to make money. Since we grew up in the same neighborhood in Lanesville, where a bunch of our community was Finnish, so we had adopted a lot of sort of the Finnish customs. We had saunas and quarries and all kinds of things like that. One of the core group of Finnish artists started this group called the Folly Cove Printers. And that involved a bunch of women making scenes of prints of sort of the local scenes that would be happening, and whether it was fishing, whether it was the vernal ponds, or any sort of local community story like that. I think, I could be wrong, but I think Lee Natty may have had something to do with it, who's a children's book illustrator. Isabel Natty was a big participant in it. And she recently passed away, I want to say 5 years ago. And Julia had been using the Folly Cove Printers Acorn Press, which I want to say there's only 2 in existence. I'm not entirely sure on that fact. But it's a massive, massive, massive press that prints these big linoleum blocks on fabric. And they're often repeated with the same block. So it's sort of a intensive task to create any sort of large piece of pattern fabric. And Julia was making her own fabric at the time, and then had started doing some press prints for Isabel as she sort of was battling breast cancer. And when she eventually passed, her son asked Julia if she wanted to take over the press. So she took over the press in the shop. And in her downtime, she goes over to the shop and she makes prints, and, you know, she makes pillowcases and table runners, which I have a bunch of, and little things like that. And I saw her yesterday, and we were talking about how hard it is to be an artist and to be able to be good at your passion, and that you always have to find some other thing to help support that passion and feed it. And unfortunately for her, scenic painting is a really laborious, time-intensive thing. So it's kind of like anybody that works on a movie set when a movie's in town. It's 2 months of working from like 7 in the morning till 11 at night, and then doing it over and over again for forever. But she's running the Sarah Elizabeth shop now, and when I stopped by, she was ironing the edges of placemats so that she could sew them. And I was like, wow, this is a lot of work. And she's like, yeah, but it's all right. It's kind of, you know, just that sort of cadence of time and rhythm and sort of doing the same thing over and over again. And she's actually working on getting someone in this store to help her, someone in school that is interested, that could learn and she could teach while she's doing her other movie set stuff, just to keep the shop moving, because when she's on movie sets, she has to close the shop. It's an interesting thing. It's beautiful stuff, and it's historical stuff, and it's really hard to keep alive because it's not something that you can sustain on your own, right, unless you have sort of, you know, a trust fund hiding somewhere helping you along.
Yeah, artists don't have sponsors the way they once did or need, unfortunately. Is there one thought that you'd like to leave with our community that you believe could make a difference in their lives?
I think I'd honestly have to go back to the idea of being able to live in the moments when you can. I think that humanity could do a lot of good for themselves and each other, just to pause and take a deep breath and not be so consumed with the I have very important things to do, but just sort of like, wow, the leaves are turning, listen to the sound the leaves are making, or, whatever it is. But I just think that we're all so hectically busy and consumed with technology that we hesitate to pause and sort of take in our surroundings for what they are in the natural environment, for sure.
That I agree with. And am trying to transform my own life in that direction even more.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. If folks want to connect with you, what places are best? I'm assuming Instagram.
Yeah, if people want to connect with me, there's always Instagram, _collage, and my email and everyth's on there. And if anyone actually really cares about my personal life, my Instagram is McTibbetts, McTibbetts.
Well, Molly, thank you. I so appreciate your time in the midst of such a full life. I don't want to call it a busy life. You have a full life. There's a difference between busy and full. And you pack yours full with important stuff. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Charles.
Thanks for listening to The Creator's Journey. If you enjoyed our theme music, the name of the song is You've Got a Home by Krista Wells. The Creator's Journey is published the first and third Sundays of each month, except for July and December. If you enjoyed the show, I would appreciate having you go to iTunes and subscribe. While you're there, if you give us a favorable rating and review, it'll make a huge difference in helping a newcomer easily find it. You can find links to today's guests, the people and books we talked about, and email me with your wonderful thoughts, all at thecreatorsjourney.com. I want to thank Yodalist for sponsoring this episode of The Creator's Journey. Yodalist is an interactive marketing platform for people in the creative world. With a vetted database of contacts from across the industry, Yodalist helps photographers, illustrators, creative directors, designers, producers, stylists, and many others to locate potential clients and gives them the tools to make those connections happen. If you want to find out how Yodalist helps creative people find one another for work, just go to yodalist.com. Today's podcast is also brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/TCJ. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.